Welcome back to Alice Customs Project Car TV. Today I'm working on the Scout again, and it's time to get our front fenders cut out. Now if you'll remember, when I started in on the rear of the truck, I wanted to get the opening a little bigger, and I wanted a more obvious lip or bump out on the body. So we used basically the same patch panels, front and rear. These are rear patch panels for a mid-70s Ford pickup. And basically at this point what I've done is I took my DA. For a while I had it in grinder mode here with some 36 grit on it, and I've been cutting away, and this thing is just full of Bondo here, much like the rest of the truck was. But when you look on the back side of this fender, there's a big hole that's been cut out of here, and then rather than weld in metal, they put a patch over the top of the hole they cut out. So I imagine somewhere along here, here, and here, we are going to find some welds. That's probably what these high spots are that are starting to show up. That's the weld on the edge of the patch. So of course all that has to come out. We need to fix the actual hole. The other thing is way back when, I had already put in one of these flares into the other fender. I'll show you a picture of that one. And so with the other one done, we need to make this one match. Now it needs to go something like that. So we're cutting out quite a bit more on the back side than the front side. We're not really taking it up any higher. But let's see, it needs to come forward some. So somewhere in there. We've got a lip here for a body line that's in the Ford pickup that we need to just cut that off so that this will lay a little flatter. Probably what I'm going to do is cut a patch out or a chunk out that very closely matches this, which this would be the other fender, so marker light up here. But basically I flipped this over, kind of lined it up, and then I went around this light on the last one just barely, and this time I'm just going to cut a straight line across there rather than making that swerve. But again, I'll cut this light out, and then we can use these panels to roughly, you know, estimate where that patch or where that hole should be for the next panel. For when we get this, we can roughly estimate where that is using the old panels again later to match it up and cut it in here so that we can put the marker lights back in the front of the truck. Basically, we just need to cut out an area, maybe a little smaller than what we think we're going to be replacing, and we're going to need to keep this thing from just splaying out. So I'm going to tack a piece of bar across from here to here. I just got to get metal showing on both sides. We'll weld a little piece of flat bar or something here so that this doesn't really move. We can cut out most of what we're doing, then lay that other patch panel in and mark it and weld it. And we'll do a cut and butt for at least 3 sides. Probably we'll see about whether we can do it down here on these short sides, but it should work. Just may have to do a little extra. Anyway, so I've marked this line here. This is where the body line is supposed to be, or at least it's where it lines up on the other fender. So we want to kind of re-establish that line as we're building this. And then this mark is how far in from this edge to here that the new arch is supposed to start. And like I said, it doesn't really go any higher, it just goes further over so that we could run a little bit larger tire. Okay, so I had previously marked on this fender based on where I thought, measurements where I thought that other fender opening was. So we are now going to take my pattern off and see how close these marks are to the last ones. I think we were right on with our previous measurements, estimate, whatever, of where that other piece was. This line closest to the camera is where I was estimating it was based off measurements. This line, which is less than 1/4 of an inch away, is where the pattern says it was. And by the time we get up here, the two lines have completely merged. So all my measurements said versus the pattern I drew was that it should be 1/4 inch further this way than that way. That, or less than 1/4, about 3/16. I'm gonna put I'd already clecoed that other piece in based on this first line, and I guess I'm gonna move it that way, 3/16 of an inch. So I'll just move my cleco holes, which are up here. So my cleco holes were here, here, and here, and I'll just move them over 3/16 of an inch. I'm gonna go off the pattern, which actually will line up with a mark I made over here. And before I was kind of trying to split the difference between that and a mark that I guess I've sanded off. So that'll line up with this one. So here is the patch that I told you was going to be in here, and it literally is just laid over the top, and they just had a bunch of Bondo in here. I mean, tons. So when we cut all this out and start figuring it out, that'll be a piece that goes away. We'll end up probably just cutting above where they cut it, up here about where this black line is, which is supposed to be where the seam is, or not seam, the body line is. So we'll probably just end up cutting on that body line and cutting out a big chunk of this, but a lot of this is coming out anyway, so we'll kind of piece that together. Last thing I want to do before we start that is I want to get this welded in down here below where we're going to be doing most of our cutting, so that I can keep this fender from doing this. So I've got my panel back in place, moved forward. Turned out it was right at 1/4 of an inch between the lines, so I moved it forward that much and then marked the perimeter. And we're going to use a kind of a hybrid cut and butt method. We're going to trim back short of this line, short of this line, short of the front line, but we'll leave, I'm probably short here, but I'll go ahead and cut all the way across so that there's plenty of room for this lip to drop in. Let's see, we need to add a little shape to it this way. There's a little bit of shape here. It's not quite completely flat. And then on this end, we need to begin getting that to roll off. So I'm going to grab the English wheel, do a little work on that real quick, and then bring it back here. And we'll kind of fit it one more time, make sure it kind of looks like it's the right shape, and then start cutting. Something else to know is I welded both sides of this fender so that I could grind this weld down. On the inside, I left a little bit of surface there. I wasn't worried about getting it perfectly smooth. Once it gets primed, and then we're going to put some bed liner type product on the inside of it. Once it is bolted onto the inner fender, it's never going to be seen again. So may as well leave a little bit of that weld just for the strength, but it was good to get as much of that off, the big parts that you could, trip over on my welds. But by welding the inside, it lets you have plenty of strength so that you can weld or grind the outside down completely flush and not worry about taking away the strength of the weld. And then you saw me for a moment there with a hammer, and a lot of times I just like a block of wood so that we're not dinging up the rest of the sheet metal, but just bringing that weld out by hammering it out from the inside. We're bringing it up, making it a little proud on the outside of the fender so that as we grind it down, it will make a nice finished and not have to have a lot of filler to fill in where the weld is at or has been gouged out. And after that initial grinding everything off, I come back and I just get the welder out again and go back over the whole panel, the whole seam, looking for pinholes or little craters where you've undercut in the weld, anything, any imperfections that are going to change how that looks, or worse yet, how it's going to allow water to collect inside the weld or something and start causing rust. And just continuing the weld cleanup on the inside of the fender. But more importantly, from this shot, you can see on the right-hand side there, you can see where the patch is and where they just cut a giant hole out and then patched over it, and how much rust is, already collected back in there. And I say already, it's been 30 years or 35 years since all this other work was done that we're going back and fixing the second time. This is a place to be careful. It's easy to cut out way more material than you are ready to actually replace. So what I've done is cut the edge off after drawing a line where I wanted the shape of the fender to go, and that was based off my pattern. And now I'm just welding in a new lip, and it's way bigger than it needs to be. Pieces of metal that I know I'm going to have to cut out, I'm not going to weld up into those. Like you can see that patch in there. We know that's coming out. So I'm just making the edge of the fender is all. And now when I cut this patch out, it gives me a place to bring the new metal back to without having to try and get the lip of the fender in place as well. So I'm just working one piece at a time, and when I have a nice shape to it, then I can take that patch out. And I cut a little too far, so that's why you see me push it back up and put a tack weld there just to hold it in place long enough to get the profile of the outside of the fender shape as well, the part where I was cutting there, so that now the new sheet metal can come in, it butts right up into it and makes it all look correct, as if it was one piece to begin with. This is the piece we cut out, and you can see the big hole they'd cut in it and then just welded a patch over it. That's one way to fix it, not the way I'd like to do it. So here's our new piece. I've got a couple of magnets to hold it in place. We've got a little shape run into it. And this really doesn't have a convex shape. It's really just got curved from top to bottom, and more on the bottom than anywhere. So we've got it pretty well where that body seam or body line is going to be, rather. And then just start tacking it in, making sure it fits. And then it's a little bigger than the actual hole that we had. So we're going to do a cut and butt on two of the sides here. And then we can weld it to the lip that we've put in. And we know we've got the shape right. It's a little hammer dolly, and places it'll fit, and other places we'll have to get the death wheel out and just cut away a little bit of material. And you're only talking, you need a 32nd or a 16th of an inch of space in there, so that you've got somewhere to weld, somewhere for the weld to go. It's been a few days since I was working on the fender. The fender is essentially done. I got some trimming to do on that last panel that we put, that's going to be where it ties into the inner fender here. This is the inner fender structure for the Scout, and the black lines here are after I got done with most of the fender. I set it up on here and just kind of marked with a Sharpie where the arch was now going to be, and then I came back about 1/4 of an inch and marked a new line, and that's where I'm going to bend this up. So initially there was a real sharp 90-degree, just a real short flange here. That we're going to take that completely out. I started working on it before I realized I hadn't had the camera running. And anyway, so I'm going to take that the rest of the way out, so we have a nice straight piece of metal here. We had a couple bolt places. Those, because of their contour and their shape, those would not let us actually bend this metal. So I had to cut through both of those where the bend is going to be, and then we'll come back and weld that back up. But and then I cut just to basically take the shape out of it. The part that's going to remain up on the fender, we don't care about that. It's all going to be underneath. You're never going to see it again. So as we bend that up, then we'll just trim up whatever we need to and cut it off and weld up the gap that we made. The holes, chances are we're going to end up filling, well, that one will go away completely. Probably all this rust that I haven't taken the time to repair, all that'll go away. This one will get welded up. I think we actually reused the front one, if I remember from the other fender. So we reuse one, and then we'll end up putting I think two more in as we go. Then the back side, because you have one bolt like right at the top here, and then you have this flange back here that bolts to the fender. All of this stuff kind of comes together and gets real rigid anyway, especially once we put a new lip in here, back up here. And then a lot of this will get trimmed off down in here, probably 3/4 of an inch or so from our expected line, bend line versus you got to leave enough room to put the roll. So the reason to add a bend or add a second line back about 1/4 of an inch from our planned bend line is because as you bend this, you're going to be using up material, and we want our inner fender to be flush with the lip of the outer fender or slightly higher, so it's on a little bit of a downward plane, not low and pointed uphill towards the fender. So you give yourself about 1/4 of an inch. That'll give you the material to actually make the bend without coming up short or coming up low on the outside fender line. I'm going to finish hammering out this lip that was in there from the factory, and then we'll start on this end and start bending up to where we've already cut through this pop out where the original fender, inner fender bolted to the original fender, and then we'll kind of work our way across. Over here we'll be taking some material off, and we'll just kind of keep test fitting our fender to get a good idea how much to take off so that we don't have to weld more material back in unless we get into the rust area, and then we'll just have to cut it, fix the damage. But I imagine we'll be up in here cutting off all the way across. So. That's pretty good there. So now we're going to want to come in and bend on this line that we've created up here with these, it's mostly these dash marks. You can do that with a few different kinds of tools. I mean, it can be as simple as a pair of like adjustable pliers that you get in there and you bend. And I've used these before to do just exactly this job, and you just keep moving over. Problem will be your throat depth. At some point, you're not going to be able to reach all the way up to your bend line. So then you either need a bigger pair of pliers, which they make, or you can use a hammer and dolly, or you've probably seen people use a piece of solid bar with a slit cut in it. That's one of the tools I like to use, but I think I've used up my last one on, like I needed some solid bar for an axle on some toy or something, so probably gonna have to make a new one. So let me go see what I can find. All right, here it is, hot off the presses. All it is a piece of, probably, it was I think 3/4 inch sucker rod, which is, for those of you out in the oil field area, you know what that is. It's well pitted and, you know, beat up, and so it's secondhand stuff that you can buy on the market. A lot of us use it for fencing and other kinds of stuff, just whatever, general stuff around the properties. Anyway, I've just cleaned it up a little bit on a wire wheel, and then I used a death wheel to cut a slot in there and got it deep enough to go all the way up to my bend line, and it goes a little bit further, but not much. That's about all I can cut out of there without going to the bandsaw and starting to try and cut a little bit deeper on the bandsaw, which I may have to do. The goal is to bend way over here. Well, we'd need it this deep. At some point it'll get weak and it won't do the job we want. So you gotta be careful how deep you make that slot. But anyway, that's what we've got. We're gonna be able to bend up to about where this cut line is, and we need to follow our line, not just this edge, because the shape of the fender is different than the original. But we're just going to come in, and you got to remember that you are not trying to bend this all at once. It's just little bends at a time. Get on your line, put a little bit of a bend in. Bit of a bend, and I mean just a little. But it will work. It will slowly pull this metal out, which, as we're doing this, we're needing to stretch this metal a little bit, so by doing it slow, And then as we'll come back a couple times with hammer and dollies, we'll be able to stretch that metal and we'll get a nice, you know, nearly level lip to go onto the fender. And I'll be back in a little while when I've made some progress here and we're switching tools. All right, well, I got as far as I could with my homemade tool. And where you get to these cuts, it makes it pretty easy. And I've gone back over it twice more. So this edge is almost 90 degrees. And pretty easily get my full 90 all the way along here now. One of the things I'm noticing is this area is starting to pull that way. So we need to get in here with a hammer and a dolly and pull this back out, hammer it back out. Now my tool, once I get to about here, my tool is done. It's got all the reach it's going to get. And yeah, I could try and go add another 1/4 to a 1/2 inch, but it's not going to do me any good when I get down here and I need another 1.5 inches to get in here. So like I said, a adjustable wrench, like a crescent wrench, they work really well if you've got just the right depth. A pair of pliers, just put it on your bend line. Take your time. You're trying to put that crease in there. That's about all we're going to reach. So we can try and make us yet a different tool to get down in here, or we can use a hammer and a dolly, and that's going to be the plan. So what we're going to do is set the dolly out here with, ideally you'd find something that has roughly this curve in it. I don't have anything, so I'm going to use one that's got a pretty straight edge and just hammer small areas, and we're going to hammer from the back side, trying to create that crease all the way back down over here. And I don't know how far we're going to get. We're going to need to test fit our fender before too long. I do know some material is going to have to come out here, and I do know I have to do some adjustments on the fender yet. So then we've got a smaller, just slightly crowned hammer, and I'm going to work on this area first to get this pulled out so that things start lining up. And you'll notice as I've done that, this lip has fallen back over, so it'll take rebending it. And what it is we're just trying to stretch that metal, and we're trying to stretch it from all in here. Now you could try and bring a stretcher over here, stretcher shrinker over here. I don't have one that would be very good for trying to do it by hand without it mounted on a vise or a bench or something. And remember, you're not trying to do all this in one hit. You're just taking your time, getting a little bit at a time in there. A little bit at a time, it'll come back. You'll get it stretched out. For any of you guys that used to ride, or maybe still do, ride motocross, talk about forearm pump. It gets you after a while. So you'll hear every now and then that the hammer is hitting the dolly through the metal. And we want that as we come around this curve, because we're trying to stretch that metal. So by hitting it, we're stretching that metal just a little bit each time. So you're trying to straighten it and stretch it all at once. Now this part up here will take a lot less work to get this to bend up and be flat, because it's a lot less stretch than this curve is here. Now I'm using a hammer that has a kind of a hook in it. Usually, like they sell this hammer as a door skinning hammer because of that hook, so you can get in next to the skin and get in the real tight area that you've got. but I also like it for a lot of this other kind of stuff because you get that hook back towards you or whatever, so you can kind of get behind a blind spot. So you just got to find hammers that do what you want to do. This is one of my favorites. So I got a little low spot right here again. I'm gonna hammer back over here. I'm gonna try a little bit bigger area hammer, try and bring that out a little quicker. Another thing to note is I'm not hitting this super hard. I'm not trying to beat it out of it. Just trying to massage it to where we want it. Now as I'm hitting that, what I'm doing is I'm hitting on this corner here, trying to stretch this metal. And then I'm coming out to the lip to fold it, to begin to bend it up. So that's why you hear me hitting in different spots, but we're getting close. I'm down to just about a 1.5 inch area here that's pulled back that way. We got to think about how we're going to do this. Now there's no way we're going to get this concave area to bend out like this. We would have to stretch this metal in here an extreme amount. So we could either cut that or cut it this way a couple times, or we can figure out what we actually need for a lip in here and trim this back so that we're not trying to move so much metal. We want to tighten up this line a little bit. See now, kind of, I guess, how much this still needs to come out, bend up. And this side we haven't, even started yet, but I think we're going to have to go ahead and trim this inner panel on the fender, the lip we made first. It's hitting on the flange on the back side. And what I'm referring to is this panel that we welded in here. I left it long in a couple different directions. We're just going to need to trim it up. That did what we wanted. So we got to figure out where that's supposed to sit on there. So we know how much of this piece of metal we still need. The front's fairly easy because we have a bracket up here that the fender attaches to. You can bolt that in and real quick see, okay, hey, this is where the front of this fender needs to go, but the back will still be all over the place. So we're gonna have to work it to about the middle and probably have to go over to the paint shop and set the fender and inner fender on the truck and just see where they line up. So I think what we're gonna do is end up cutting this inner fender. There's a place where it was trying to split, so I'll just cut it there. We'll get this from here to here done, get our bolts in it, and then we'll figure out this side. Alright, so I said I didn't have a stretcher that couldn't be mounted on a vise, and I was like, well, I don't know why it couldn't be handheld. You need some leverage. So I took a piece of 1x2 or maybe 1x1.5 square tubing, and it had bolts, and I usually have this mounted to a plate with a piece of angle iron welded to it, and then both my stretcher and shrinker on the same one, and the angle iron gets caught in the vise. And I just thought, well, what the heck, let's try it. So drilled a couple holes in the piece of square tube, and sure enough, it's work. You're pulling against yourself, pushing against, but it actually works. We're stretching that metal out. And that lip has come up. Now I still have a little bit of a low spot in here that I'm going to have to hammer on. But if I can stretch a lot of this with something like this, it takes a whole lot of that forearm pump of hammering out of the job. And I can do that up to about here, and then the jaws are just too shallow to come on around. Now they do make deep-throated shrinker stretchers. I don't have one, but if you don't have, and these are very inexpensive. I mean, you can buy the Econo kit where it's just one tool and 2 different sets of dies, and you just change out the dies, which is very easy. I bought the set that has both tools, not just one, but everybody sells them. I think Harbor Freight, Eastwood, Jegs, I think everybody has their own version of this, and they are probably all made in the same factory in China, whatever, you know. The goal here is just to have a tool that will help you do a job, and this is certainly adding some stretch to this metal, which will help us get that bend in there. So I may need it a little more right in here because I got a little bit of a low spot. But I think from here I can try hammering out this backside again, flattening this out, but most of it has already come up to almost 90 degrees just with the stretching I just did. So we can stretch across here a little bit more, that'll help. I can't get all the way into the bend, but if I can stretch this front edge, it will help with the stretching along that bend. So anyway, I'm going to hammer on this some more and I'll be back. Alright, well, I did a pivot. And what I mean by that is I got this flange bent, welded up the one hole and the cuts that I'd made, and I was down to the next piece and I was going to have to weld up a hole and a couple cuts, and still trying to figure out how I was going to bend this piece of metal up, stretch it enough through here to actually make that bend. You can see, had you just bent this up, got it in the right place, look at all the metal you need to get this thing to come out, right? To bend. And so all of this area would have to stretch. And it's totally possible, although it would get pretty damn thin. So then I kind of took another look at it and said, you know, I've probably bent all I'm going to get bent without making it paper thin and or taking, I don't know, hours and days of hammering on that. So I just cut it off on my bend line, and I cut back this way just to get this piece out of the way, because I do want to kind of save this flange. We're going to need, I mean, I could replace the whole thing, but the metal's good. And then this is a piece of 20 gauge, and it's just going to go in here. I'm going to get a little more bend on it. I've just been bending it over my leg, right there. We're just going to put that in there, and I'll get plenty of material to the outside so that we can trim it off, and I will mark a line where this fender meets it. We'll cut off the excess on the inside. Now I started with a piece 5 inches wide, 24 inches long. Again, just I want more metal than I need so that as I go to work, I don't run short of metal somewhere and go, well, crud, I wish I'd have gone a 1/4 inch wider. So we're going to get this out, something like that. Get some tack welds in there. Well, first we'll get it marked and get this inside cut back so we get down to this area at least, and then we can always trim it some more as we need to. But we're just kind of eyeballing it in line with this front edge, and I can measure off my other inner fender and see how much I need from this flange out to here to where the fender met it. and then I can go test fit it at the body shop before I do any final welding on it. Just get it tacked in pretty close to where I think it's going to be, and then I can mark on this piece where I want to cut it so that I have a nice lip that comes into the fender but doesn't stick out too far. There you go, that's the idea. And then come back and weld this whole inside, grind it off a little bit, and then weld the other side, grind that just like I did the doors, we did patches on the fender, you get the idea. And then this will get, this piece and this piece will get hammered and dollied till we fill out this corner. And it may take that I cut that tack loose and merge the pieces a little better in this complex corner here. And then the idea that all of this would run essentially straight, trim that off, and that would become the, you know, the back of the fender, or the back of the inner fender, obviously, to keep stuff from going inside the fender. So I'm gonna throw a few more tacks on here just to hold it in place good. And then honestly, I think it's gonna be time to go over to the paint shop. All right guys, back over at All Sick Customs, dropping off fenders for the Scout. And you can see, got all of that welding done. We got this piece in the inside here, the splash guard, and John has helped me get these things mounted up and test fit multiple times. And you can see on the passenger side here, we got that one all done. Everything's coming together on it. And then we've got the inner fender we were working on here done up as well. So added a lip for the fender to guide to. And I think on the inside of the fender here, the last thing I was going to show you was ended up putting some mounting bolts in here for that inner lip. So it's all finished up now, finished welded, and just needs John to do all the body work. And he's been making some progress back here on the quarter panels, getting everything cleaned up. We decided to go ahead and fill the quarter panel holes for the clearance lights or the marker lights, and we're going to just use some LED low profile lights in there. So that's one thing coming up. He filled those in this week for me, just in the last few days. So that's it. That's an update on the Scout.